Have you ever been told that speaking in tongues is not for today? Maybe you've heard people speak in tongues and it seemed weird. You thought to yourself, this is too strange to be God. Or maybe you believe that people can still speak in tongues today, but that it's not for everybody. Whether you're skeptical or intrigued, whether you speak in tongues or don't, my new book, 9 Lies People Believe About Speaking in Tongues, is the book for you. Get your copy wherever Christian books are sold and head over to stevebremner.com and click on the first link on the homepage for more information about how you can spread the word. Enjoy the show.
Dropping some knowledge and a little love. This is the Fire on Your Head podcast with your host, Steve Bremner. Steve Bremner, missionary to Peru and blogger at stevebremner.com. The podcast where we tackle gray areas your pastor doesn't talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Bremner.
Greetings and welcome to Fire on Your Head. I'm Steve Bremner, your host this week. Well, every week. And coming up, we've got an interview/discussion I did with the lovely Amber Picota, talking about her forthcoming book, God's Feminist Movement. And it was my plan to post this interview next week or in 2 weeks. But today, or at least the day I'm recording this intro, I was scheduled to record an interview with my highest profile guest to date in 9 years of doing this podcast. But I messed it up. So that's not to say this discussion with Amber was some kind of plan B or something. I recorded it a few weeks ago, and I'm getting around to some of the episodes I had in the can. If you've been listening to this podcast, or at least been listening to it lately, you'll know a couple of things about Fire on Your Head, especially if you listened to last week's episode with David Edwards. For starters, we believe in 2006, we're going to take this podcast to another level in terms of guests, in terms of reach, and other things that, although you can measure to some degree, I don't see how I can do on my own. That's where you come in. If you like these episodes of the show, make sure to share them with your friends on social media. Make sure to let people know about your favorite episodes or any that have touched you in some kind of way. That's the number one way that this show has grown over the last few years. And on many occasions, that's actually gotten me in touch with other people who have eventually gone on to become guests on this show. Right now, as I'm sharing this with you, I'm trying not to fracture my skull from banging my head on the wall, the concrete wall at that, for having bungled a really high-profile interview that was scheduled for this morning. I'll just spit it right out so you aren't trying to guess and figure out who it was. I was going to interview Dr. Michael Brown this morning. If you're a subscriber to this podcast or a longtime listener of this show, then you've heard me refer to him on many occasions, sometimes as a point of reference when talking about certain things like hyper grace or revival. For those who don't know who he is, he's a national radio show host, author of a bazillion books, and I don't mean like popular level fluff books, but a majority of them are well-researched and even academic books in some cases. He was also one of the leaders of the Brownsville Revival, which birthed the Fire School of Ministry, where Dave Edwards and I went. And not to mention, I've had several other guests on this podcast who either graduated from there or a couple who taught there, like SJ and Bert Farias. But as of late, Dr. Brown's also a contributor to Charisma Magazine and Town Hall. So needless to say, this was going to be a very big get for us to land on the show. I asked him in private email exchange back in September if he would be willing to let me interview him on my podcast. I didn't ask him if I could be on his nationally syndicated radio show, just so you know, but I asked him if he would be willing to let me interview him on my dinky little podcast. And I never heard back from him, which I didn't think anything of because I know how busy he is and I know how many people must be contacting him for favors like that. And soon after I posted that episode a few weeks ago with Larry Sparks, Dr. Brown wrote me apologizing for not having answered my email and told me he would gladly let me interview him. So he puts me in contact with his assistant Dylan, and we arranged a meeting. We arranged a time. It was going to be yesterday morning, which means nothing to you if you're listening to this in the podcast audio format. But as that date neared, he wrote me letting me know Dr. Brown was going to need to switch it and asked me if I was good for the following morning today. And at the same time, I thought I wrote back saying it would work. So like whenever I record in the morning, which is much easier for me to schedule with people, I still need to make plans for my 2-year-old daughter to not be here, for reasons like not wanting her to bang on the door and come into the office when daddy is recording, or scream and throw any fits that can't really be edited out of the background or muted, even if she's in the other room. So this is really just easy to accomplish when it's a morning my daughter has nursery classes. But this wasn't one of those mornings, so I gave Lily some money to take her to play. They were going to go to the mall and have lunch, I guess. And we figured out how we would do all this and, work around it. And I was setting my gear up to make sure everything was connected right, that I didn't record the show without turning my microphone on. Like, I think the last time I did that was with James Michael Smith, and just make sure I don't forget anything or have any embarrassing mistakes that a rookie would make. I had my wife pray for me shortly before that interview was to start so that I could get over this nasty migraine and head cold, because the last thing I wanted was to look on the video like I wasn't really interested, or that I was falling asleep or something. So I sat at my desk for like the 15 to 20 minutes before the interview was supposed to come on, and I kept checking Skype to see if he may have accepted my contact request, as oftentimes my guests accept them shortly before the interview starts because they're not normally on Skype other than to record with me or other people who've sought an interview with them. And of course I sat there looking at everything that was open on my screen, double checking, because the last thing you want to do is make Dr. Brown wait or not be ready when you said you would be for him. And this man is carving out time from his busy schedule for me in my tiny in comparison podcast, after all. So then 10 a.m. my time zone comes along, and still no evidence that he's showing up. So I keep, checking my email to make sure there's no new email notifying me that he couldn't make it, because you'd be surprised how often I have a guest or an interview of some kind booked, and they email me as last minute as that. I've woken up to interviews with people in other time zones, and I've gotten up earlier than I normally would, and oh, sorry, Steve, I couldn't make it. It's like, what the heck did I get up for? And I'm not seeing or hearing anything, and so I double checked the conversation between me and Dylan and Dr. Brown's assistant, and to my horror, I notice that the other day when I answered him, I didn't hit the send button, or it didn't go through or whatever, because it was still there sitting in my draft folder. So no need to panic. Maybe if I go check Gmail itself, it's going to show up in the sent folder, because that happens from time to time. But no, I go check there, and same thing. I've got this email still sitting in the sent folder. So fortunately for me, his assistant Dylan answered me a few hours later and let me know that there were no worries, and Dr. Brown didn't get ticked off and how dare you waste my time, or, I'll never book an appointment with you again, or whatever kind of things you worry might happen. I'm sure they just filled that spot when I didn't answer him promptly, since I do that kind of thing anyway, and I'm not even super busy like Dr. Brown is. So if all goes to plan, I'll probably be posting that episode as the next show on this feed. If not, then I've got another 2-hour interview sitting in the can with Matthew Robert Payne. I recorded recently with him. He's an Australian prophet and fellow author. So that episode just needs editing, and I'll post it shortly after that. But as you can imagine, I'm rather anxious to have Dr. Brown on my podcast and post that one as soon as it's available. So I anticipate, because I'm only supposed to have a limited amount of time with him, like less than an hour or whatever, that one will take me less time to edit, less time to publish, and just have a quick turnaround. So shouldn't be a problem if nothing else goes wrong. But anyway, today's show was with a woman named Amber Picota. She's co-pastoring a church in Virginia with her husband Renee, and you're probably listening to today's episode for that very reason. If you're a regular listener of this show, then this is just the latest episode. You're going to check out a cool interview / discussion with a very animated woman of God. And but as is often the case, my guests usually share this with their fans and followers, and they get to check out my show for the first time through their whoever they're a fan of's appearance on my show. So if you're connected to Amber in some way, I hope you enjoy this discussion today and learn a few things about her that you may not have already known. I got to know her on Facebook after talking to a mutual friend and connection at Destiny Image Publishers. Her name is Sierra, and she was helping me with my social media strategy and connected me with a bunch of new people on Facebook, and just to see what kind of relationships I can form with people, because I'm not a very self-promotion-y kind of guy. You may have noticed that. Otherwise, this podcast would be a lot more popular than it is after 9 years. But anyway, Amber was someone who became a connection, somebody naturally I'd been in contact with and following what each other is doing. So, I went ahead and we've wound up doing an interview like this today. So today's podcast, it's basically like the first time we chatted, as is the case lately with different guests I have on. I found out we're at very similar circumstances in life, not the least of which is, publishing around the same time. But anyway, I won't say much about that, nor her church story, her testimony, and these things, because that's going to come up naturally in this discussion. So enough about me and my ineptness at booking interviews with nationally syndicated radio show hosts. Subscribe to this podcast if you like today's discussion and you're looking forward to hearing more just like it at fireonyourhead.com. So without any further ado, let's get to my interview with Amber Picota. I forgot to ask you offline how to pronounce your name right. Amber Picota?
Picota, yes, good.
Okay. Got it on the first try. It doesn't always happen that I get it on the first try. And we've been in touch a little bit for a number of weeks, maybe a few months, about doing an interview. And it dawned on me, and I think I said this in the email to you, that this is the first time in years I've had a female guest, which I think is kind of ironic for this stuff we're going to talk about anyway. Not because I don't ever have women on my podcast, but most of the times that I've invited people on, I've never had an answer or heard back from people. So it's been 6 years since I've had female guests, and sometimes I have people, they contact me and they say, "Why don't you ever have any women on your podcast?" I was like, "That's a good idea. If any of them take me up on the invitation, then I will." So say something so people know that you're actually there.
Hello, I'm Amber.
So you're also a fellow Destiny Image, about to be published author, and the title of your book is
God's Feminist Movement.
Right. So if we're going to talk about that, I haven't read the book. I've got no idea what's in it. It could be, I mean, I have no idea where we'll be in agreement, where we'll be in disagreement. I have no idea what'll happen in our conversation today. We're just turning this on and going for it. But that's really interesting to me. And the reason is because I grew up in a Plymouth Brethren church where women aren't allowed to be preachers, or at least maybe now they say that they don't feel that way. I don't know. But when I grew up, it was no. And, I knew people who left that church because they thought women were given too much, liberty in things to do. And they thought, no. And we weren't the type of church that head coverings were obligatory, but we were other churches in that denomination in our hometown. They would give you a head covering at the door if you didn't have one and stuff like that. Right. So, but then I went to a charismatic Bible college in Pensacola, Florida. And the first research paper I did was on women in ministry, basically to just explore the opposite and give that to anybody back home that might be willing to read it. So I'm all for women in ministry and whatever, with the caveat that not everybody should be, just like not everybody should be a pastor, not everybody should be whatever. So anyway, yeah. So I don't have any specific questions to start off with, but I got your blog open here. Let's start there. How long you been blogging?
I've been blogging. Now, my journey as a blogger has transformed over the years. So I started out as like a fitness and food blogger. But overall, I've been blogging for probably 4 years now, for probably close to 5 years.
Okay. And do you find the habit of writing a blog like helped make it easy to get writing a book?
Yes. What I do is I will write pretty concentrated on a subject that's really it's really strong on my heart. It's really heavy on my heart at the moment. I'm feeling really passionate about it. And even though I'll go through a rough draft before I obviously put it on my blog, when I go back to refine it for putting it in a book, I still find that I have to do a lot of adjustments, and maybe my perception has changed a little bit. And sometimes I'm even I kind of disagree with myself.
Right. Because
if it was a year old, I may have studied more on a topic. But yeah, blogging to me is, even though I have rough drafts, it's like the slightly less rough draft version, but I feel like it makes my books more refined. Right. And maybe not, it's still just as passionate and raw, but I've thought about it from other angles and thought about how my words can be perceived and how I can appeal to people from various backgrounds. So I find it to be just slightly more sharp by the time I get to the book writing phase of it.
Right. See, I had some Kindle books I published where they were basically repurposing blog material. And then with the Tongues book, maybe 20 or 30% of that was content that had been on my blog. And then the rest of it, I decided to go for it fresh, so that as little of the book as possible had already been on the internet. Because the first time I submitted a book to Amazon, they said no, we've got this, we've flagged this content on the internet and you need to prove you're the author. And I'd found old blog posts of mine that had been copied and pasted onto other people's websites and stuff. And it's I knew that was a thing, but I didn't know it was if I wanted to use my own blog content and make a book, that I could run into some snags, or other people had what do you call it? There's a term for it. And not even maliciously copying and pasting and pretending it's theirs, but curating there you content.
Go. Yeah, that's what it is.
For some reason that word was escaping me. And so I had to go around and ask people to remove stuff. I told Amazon, this is mine. So with the Tongues book, I was I had enough content on my blog to know people were Googling stuff that landed them on my site, but I didn't want to have this kind of problem again. So as much of it as possible was fresh content. And then, and I self-published it. And then after a year, somebody at Destiny Image got in touch with me wanting to publish it. So that was how it worked in my case with that book. And yours, how did it come about that somebody, somebody contact you, or did you reach out to them, or?
Yeah. It's actually really just one of those strange kind of this was God stories. We all have this stuff that it's so bizarre that it's only God. And about 6 years ago, I read a book by Bill Johnson called When Heaven Invades Earth. And this book wrecked me. Okay. I cried. I wept while I was reading it. By the time I got done reading, the pages had tear stains on them. And I remember as I finished it, I held the book in my hands, and it was just one of those moments where it was really heavy, and I was just I knew that I was changed. And I looked at the book, and I didn't even know who Bill Johnson was. It's not like I even knew about Reading or any of that. And I just remember looking at the book, and it was published by Destiny. And I said to myself, I want to do something like this one day. I want to change the world because of something that I wrote. And I had a friend of a friend of a friend who had been published. And then I heard about all that she went through to be published. She had to pay I don't know, $20,000 or something. And she had to go through like a very extensive ordeal to be published. So as I was recalling what my friend's friend had gone through, I was saying to the Lord, not even as a prayer of a request, like, God, do that for me. But I was just like, I don't want to have to jump through a million hoops. What I would love is to have something that is so powerful that, you know, and it's so life-changing that a publisher would want to get that message out there, and I wouldn't have to pay. And in fact, they would seek me out. And it wasn't formed even as like an official prayer, like, oh God, please do this for me. I just saw it like, I want to do this one day. And so I just like filed that in the back of my mind, moved on with life. And I've always been like a journaler. Like I journaled in spiral notebooks before we had MacBooks. So
or tablets.
Or tablets or any of that. So like I have spiral notebooks around here somewhere that would make me look like some sort of a crazy woman, because just it's sporadic and wild writings that I have written over the decades. So I continue to write and blog about just whatever was on my heart. But 3 years ago, I joined a supernatural Bible school called Welton Academy. So I joined Welton Academy, and like I had a lot of passion in life before then, but I didn't really have a theological leg to stand on. Like I was passionate about the Bible, and I would have told anyone, I believe the Bible, but I really I had trouble like understanding certain things, and I couldn't reconcile certain parts of the Bible with other parts of the Bible at the time. I was just like, this is so confusing to me because I'm not really sure I understand this. But in the first year of Welton Academy, I learned so much. And I think what I loved the most about school is that I learned how to understand the whole Bible. Like, honestly, I may not understand everything, but if I sat down for a couple of hours, I could study some things out and help anybody who wanted to understand a certain like verse or chapter, or like, what in the world does this mean, kind of thing. So that's what I loved, is that it equipped me to understand the Bible. So I start combing through scripture with like a new heart, a new fervor, and I'm seeing all these things that I had never noticed before about women in leadership, about just being a woman in general. I was noticing things like that really contradicted the Christianese things we hear Christians repeat. And I was just like, does anybody else know this is here? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who's ever seen this. I mean, obviously that's very naive, but I'm combing through it, and I'm just like, this doesn't really line up with what we've been taught our whole life, but it's here in the Bible for anybody who would like to see it. So, but the things that I was seeing was stuff about like dating and relationships and purity and modesty and even submission in marriage. I was seeing things there for the first time with like a brand new eye. So I was like, I'm going to start writing, but I don't even know. This could be like groundbreaking for all I know, which it's not. I'll say that now that I know. But so I start writing, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe I am called to write a book. And so I was just like, I'm going to start writing. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to write. And so that's what I did. But 1 year ago, I got a job offer working for Doug Addison, who lives in Los Angeles, but I'm his social media director here in Virginia. And Doug has different webinars that he does. And one of his webinars was called Write Your Book Now, or Write a Book Quickly. I can't remember, because there's a book and a webinar, and I might have those two titles backwards. So as his social media coordinator, I attended these webinars, and it just rocked my world. I was just like, okay, I've been writing like a crazy woman, but I'm not really getting anywhere very fast. And after attending his webinar and reading his book, because there are two, there's a webinar and a book, and I went through both of them. I was just like, I just felt like I knew what the next step was, and it made me just sit down, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do a table of contents. Okay, I'm just going to break this down into bite-sized chunks, and I'm going to write my way through it. So I started writing this, and I got a message from a friend on Facebook who I had no idea worked for Destiny. I couldn't even tell you how we know each other now, except for that we just run in similar circles. And so she messages me on Facebook. Are you going to submit what did she say? Are you going to submit a book proposal to me? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know. Who is this anyway? So I go and do a little Facebook stalking. Like, okay, we've all done that to somebody. I do a little Facebook stalking and I'm like, oh my goodness, she works for Destiny Image. And I'm just like having this wild moment where I remember myself with the Bill Johnson book. And I'm just like, I don't even want to get my hopes up right now because this is so wild. But I realized she worked for Destiny and I didn't really have a proposal and I didn't even know what a proposal was. But I went back and messaged her, just tell me where to send it because I'll just do it.
Right.
So she gives me an email address and a link that explains a little bit more about what is involved in the book proposal. And I was just like, I'm not going to sleep until I have this book proposal ready and I'm going to send it and we're going to do this. And so I did. And they accepted the book and it's been a very, very cool journey for me.
Right. My journey is something like that. I've been blogging almost 12 years now. And like when I started, there wasn't social media. There wasn't like how to, share it on Twitter and stuff. And I remember I had to learn HTML code to do my own links on the sidebar. And then like a year later, that was a feature, like it was just something that, like I remember stuff that like is just, drop and, mix and match. But like, anyway, and I'd been doing that for years and years. And yeah, I've changed focus a bit and stuff too over the years and eventually migrated to like my own, like myname.com and stuff. But it was 5 years ago or more. Like I've also accumulated Destiny Image books over the years. And I too read that Bill Johnson book, a longer time ago than what you said. And it never dawned on me like, I want to write a book for Destiny Image someday. But the more I was blogging, I was like, I could write books. Like I remember before having a Kindle, before, when you live in another culture and you can't get books and you're an avid reader, you're borrowing everybody's books. And like, I'm resisting the urge to highlight and mark up and stuff because they're not my books. And so I remember one trip where there was some kind of conference at Morningstar in South Carolina. I forget the name of the city at the moment where they're based. And it's close to Charlotte where I was going every year, right? Because that's where my Bible college moved to. And I remember buying a box of books, like not a box, but like a pile of books and a few people giving me books and whatever. And, spreading them out in my suitcases so they weighed the limit because, now I'm like, these are going to last me a few months in Peru. And probably like 10 books or 11 books. And like only 2 of them were not Destiny Image, just by coincidence, right? Like it wasn't some kind of thing like, oh, Destiny Image, I'm going to make sure to buy only their books. And in that year, my friend Dave was really getting serious about trying to get his manuscript turned into a book. And it was content on a site we made together at the time. And so I knew what the content of the book was. And he recommended I listen to Don Noray's like his blog talk radio thing. And so we were both listening to it one morning and Dave calls in and asks him a question or whatever. And then, in the same call, the same show, like I call in too and get through, no problem. They're like, okay, hold on. He'll answer you in like 5 minutes. And I had a question for him too about how you're ready, like to write a book. 'Cause like, I feel like I don't have a specific message or passion. I'm just like a general teacher. Like you tell me what the topic is, or like in our school, I tell our leader, Mark, you just tell me the stuff you don't want to teach on the calendar, and I'll do the rest because I'm good with that. But if it's this or this, I want to teach it. And so I asked him, like, how do you know you're ready to write a book? How do you know when it's time? And he said, like, if you had a room of 5,000 people and you only had 1 hour to talk to them, what would you preach to them? And I forget what I said, but I don't remember it being very specific. Like it was about like the Holy Spirit or something. And he said, there you go. That's your book. And so, I mean, it took some honing in on just like speaking in tongues eventually, right? But I tested the waters with Amazon and doing short Kindle books and stuff, because then I learned it doesn't matter how short or how long they are on Kindle, you know, and there's no publisher and all that kind of stuff. So I went for that first, and then I did that with the tongues book and didn't even try to get published because I was just seeing the benefits of self-publishing, right? And then my friend Brad, who I'd been in like a Facebook friends or something for a while, he just started working for Destiny Image and decided to show his bosses or whatever that book, and then I too had to do a book proposal so that he could have something to show everybody, and it's like a year-long process. Like it was like Thanksgiving or Christmas, and then like a year later and a bit later, it's finally out, you know? So yours comes out like in what, July or June, or it's
July.
Yeah. So it's still a few months off, but
yeah.
And I love it. It felt really weird so far having a team, having a bunch of people involved in like something I came up with or I've created, you know, like, do you have an exhilaration or something like that as a writer?
Yeah. It's been like, there's a flip side of that coin too, because I don't know what your personality type is, but, in case you're familiar with it, in Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFP. So some would say the P stands for procrastinator, but that's not technically what it means.
I'm an ENTJ or something like that.
So you're a J. The J's tend to be more orderly and not necessarily organized, but can deal well with structure and prefer it that way. Whereas a P is more of a like free thinker, like please don't chain me in your boxes kind of person.
Right.
And so there were some really surreal moments for me. Like, this is amazing that there are other people that want to make this happen too. Like, and the agent they assigned to my book or to me or whatever, Sierra, she's amazing and I love her to pieces. The editor that worked on the manuscript was amazing, but there were moments for me, because book production requires the J type of personality, because you have to have that order and structure to birth something like that, to say, okay, we have this deadline, we have that deadline. But my P personality type, that loose, free spirit, was just like, oh my gosh, you want me to have another deadline?
Yeah.
And like, are you seriously emailing me about this again? And now you want another deadline, and I have to get you this picture and that summary and this. And so I had moments where I was just like, and I was just having to remind myself that I had prayed these people into my life.
Right.
Because I told God, you know me, and you know I can't do this on my own. I just can't do it. I need structure and order, but it doesn't come from inside of me, like, because I'm just not very good at that. It's not my strength, and I don't want it to be my strength. So he really put people around me that were that mom and pop kind of people that were just like, you know, they were calmer than me, because I'm a little bit hyper of a person and like high strung.
No, I don't have that impression.
And they were just like steadiness and peace, and like, even with the deadlines they gave me, I started to realize that they were giving me like soft deadlines, because even when I missed the deadlines, which I did almost every time, they're just like, honey, you need to get me this, and just walking me through everything very kindly. And I thought that was really just shows the brilliance of the Father, because he really put people in my life that are different than me, but necessary to help me do the things that he's called me to do.
Yeah. Not to get talking too much about my book, because I have you on to talk about yours. But one thing that was interesting is when you're filling out the book proposal, and it asks like, how many speaking engagements you've gotten the next year and how many social media followers and all this kind of stuff. And I wrote back and I like to Brad, and I was like, dude, I'm a missionary down here and I don't even know if I'll be in America in the next year. And he's like, no, that's okay. That's okay. We think this book is good. And this is to see how you fit in or how we'll fit you in, And but I just remember like the book proposal intimidated me. And I think that's why I had never done one before. Like I'd been to Destiny's site and saw the book proposal. And I thought, oh, well, they want my book, then good. I'll just give it to them and sign whatever they want. And, make sure I'm not signing my life away. Because that's the other thing is, you probably don't have an agent or something either. Because I don't and I didn't. So I talked to like 20 people before signing anything, to get people's advice. And I had heard horror stories. I heard people talk me. I had, a mix of people talking me out of it and another mix of people saying, like, one guy told me, I have given my manuscript to like 20 people before someone wanted it, and you've got a book publisher coming to you. I would just give it to them if I were you. Who cares if you don't? Who cares if you don't own it anymore? You know what I mean? Like all the things I was worried about. Some people were like, "You're right to be worried," and then other people were like, "No, give it to them." You know what I mean? You're not gonna. And then now that it's out, it's like, okay, so how do I get people to know about it? How do I get people to like want to buy it? Why would a store want to, stock it? And at the same time, it's like I don't care. I'm happy that I can say I published a book, but there's that. Well, I did write it so as many people as possible could read it, and so now it's a whole other ball game of marketing and promoting and stuff. So anyway, God's Feminist Movement. So where do you want to go first? About the book itself, or your testimony, your background? Because you got a pretty wild testimony. So which one of those two would be easiest to start with?
Well, I can start with the book and summarize. My testimony is actually in the book.
Sure.
Because I felt like in order to go where I needed to go in the book, I really needed to give people a background story. But, God's Feminist Movement is not about a political agenda. That's not where I'm going with it. What my heart is that I believe that the Father is bringing into the body of Christ a movement where he's calling the moms up to lead with the dads. This isn't about saying, down with the men. There's no man hating allowed in God's Feminist Movement, because it's really about co-heirs. It's about being co-heirs. It's about ruling and reigning with Christ and advancing the kingdom together with equal authority in the body of Christ. So there's no down with the men, picket signs allowed, and things like that. But the overall summary of the book, some of the things I talk about are submission and marriage. I talk about dating. I talk about beauty, and the things that God has shown me about what it means to be beautiful. And I talk about some of the really, like, for a woman, these are like hot topics because there's extreme tradition that is like oozed into these, and people say things like, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. And for many women that have grown up Christians, we think, oh, well, then it must be in the Bible. And some of it is really not. It's just simply the traditions of women. It's the traditions that we pass down, not maybe knowing why we're adopting this into our lives, but it's because this is what we've always been told. So I have a very maybe different perspective on some of these things, but it's very biblical, and I gave like enough scriptural like references to fuel someone's studies for years within my book. So I don't really, what I don't do in this book is try to build a case for women in ministry, because there are other books that have already done that. Powerful and Free by Danny Silk is one of them. Fashion to Reign by Chris Valentin. Normal Christianity by Jonathan Welton has a chapter on women in ministry. But Powerful and Free goes through every single verse in the Bible that is considered basically, he calls it a problem verse, but he's not trying to say the Bible is a problem. What he's saying is that people have misinterpreted the context and therefore are not holding true to the original meaning of the text. For example, women be silent in church, or I do not permit a woman to speak in church. So what he does is he carefully goes through and he teaches what this means in context. How does it apply to the modern New Covenant believer, etc.? So I don't do that in my book. I do not try to build a case for why women should be allowed to lead, but I address things that women who do lead face in a daily basis as a leader. The submission in marriage, I think, is probably a perspective that is really different than what we normally hear in the average church, especially charismatic churches. But basically, as I was reading the scriptures with pretty much like a new, fresh set of eyes, because I was like, okay, I'm not going to read the Bible trying to make it be what I want it to be because what I already think I believe. I'm just going to read it and I'm going to start letting it teach me. I'm going to let the Holy Spirit teach me through the Bible instead of trying to, force the scripture to affirm what I already believe. And one of the things that I had learned in Bible school that really, really opened my eyes is that in the original manuscripts, they were letters a lot of times to other believers. So Paul would write Timothy, and this is the letter, and now it's our Bible. But in order to understand what certain scriptures mean, we also need to remember that they were a letter. And so we're peeking into their private conversation kind of thing. And some of them were instructions to other churches and things like that, specific churches. But what really, really shocked me, I don't know why it shocked me, because common sense, if you think long enough about this, would tell you this, but it had never occurred to me. There aren't any chapter breaks or verses in the original letters. Like Timothy wasn't like, all right, verse 3 of my letter or whatever. Paul, I'm sorry.
Can you imagine writing your emails that way?
Exactly, right? So we're on verse 3 now. Or here's chapter 2 of my email to you. I've already headed the chapter for you. But what I realized, if you're an
ENTJ or whatever, that kind of thing might actually not be funny to you. It might be, but anyway.
You might like that if you're an ENTJ. But I was reading through Ephesians 5, actually, where we have some instruction given to families. And it dawned on me that there was a chapter break in between verse 21 and 22. Let me make sure I'm pulling that up right. Oh, I turned this off. Sorry. There's a chapter break. So if I'm quoting it right, I may have one verse off, but I'll double check it. Verse 21, I believe, is submit to one another. And verse 22, I believe, is wives submit to your husbands. And so as I was reading this, I was just like, I was realizing that there's a chapter break right in between those. So there's a shift that takes place that really wasn't there in the original letters. And so I was seeing this and I was just like, wait a second. What if submission goes both ways in marriage? What if there's not a hierarchy? What if, and so I began to read and scour other verse.
It's not a chapter break, but you probably have like a subtitle, like right there, verse 21 of verse 22.
Subtitle. That's what I meant to say. Sorry about that.
No worries.
And it varies depending on which version of the Bible you're reading, but most have a subheading. You're right.
Yeah. But that does cut off, and chapter 6 begins with children obey your parents, right?
Yes.
So, gotcha.
Yes. So I guess I was really just reading this with new eyes, thinking like, maybe this doesn't mean exactly what we've always thought it meant. And I went on down and read where it says in Ephesians 5 as well, for for husbands to love your wives as Christ loved the church. And I found I just began to ponder on that. And I was just like, nobody anywhere, hopefully, is saying, well, I'm a wife, I don't have to love my husband. The Bible commands husbands to love their wives. That doesn't go both ways. We just naturally understand it because the Bible calls us to love one another. Well, I started to see that the Bible also calls us to submit to one another. So I felt like I was like I was just having a light bulb moment. But for me personally, I'm a strong-willed person. I'm a more loud and opinionated type of woman, whereas what's commonly accepted as feminine is quiet and timid and submissive. So when I got married, it was like I believed that, and this was my beliefs when I married, that my husband had the last say. He was my boss. And these were the things that I was programmed to believe because of my background. This is the way I had been raised. It was the only thing I ever saw. Dad is the boss, and what he say goes. And mom might have a say, but at the end of the day, it's what dad says that goes. I'm thinking from a kid's perspective. But I went through book after book after book that were, the aim of the book was to teach me to submit. And I was basically torturing myself, even though I didn't realize it. And now we have a marriage that's very healthy. My husband is totally supportive of my ministry. He's supportive of the things that I teach about submission. And now we have a marriage where we mutually submit to one another. My husband is probably a J. We talked about Myers-Briggs. He leads our finances. In the past, I led them, and it didn't. I got things done, but it was like always a scramble, and it always made me really stressed out. So my husband leads the finances. There are other areas where I lead in. For example, I'm a stronger teacher than he is. And so if we had, although he's a hot and fiery preacher, like he can preach a house down. And sometimes I think, man, I'd really like to be more like that. Although that's him, and we can embrace each other's differences, embrace our strengths and weaknesses. And now we have a really beautiful thing going. Whereas in the beginning of our marriage, it was about who was going to dominate the other person. And he wasn't, I was in the wrong too, because there I was reading these books about how to submit. And really what it was doing to me, I was having this like really kind of sick mind games going on where it was like, I'll submit, but I'll be really manipulative to try to control the situation still. And now, if I disagree, I'll just be like, I disagree. That probably is going to be a bad idea, but let me tell you why. And we talk it through and we move forward when we're in agreement. So there's a totally different dynamic now than when we were first married. So that's been a pretty, like, out of the people that I asked to endorse a book, that was one of the things that I heard back from a few of my mentors, like, wow, Amber, this is really different. Like, we're not even sure if we can swallow all of this. Like, it was just a couple of people, but I broke things down really simple.
When you say they couldn't swallow, like people who basically like, I'm just going to ask like this way, females or men?
Men.
Yeah. That's what I suspected. I was just trying to see if you'd say it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't like it to be an us versus them kind of thing.
Sure.
And my heart on that. But yeah, there were two different male mentors that I've looked up to for a very long time. And I knew that I was taking a risk by putting my story out there. And I knew that I was taking a risk by presenting this new idea to charismatic Christianity but I know that it's the only way to bring change is to take a risk of being criticized and taking a risk of somebody saying, well, that's just that's a heretical statement. You know, every revolutionary was called a heretic. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And so to bring change to the church, it's going to take people who are brave enough to say, you know, this is what the Bible says, and we have to understand it in context as well, and risking people saying, well, that's stupid, or that's blasphemous, you know, like, okay, well, that's maybe a little dramatic to call it blasphemous, but let me explain, you know, like, let me lay out this teaching for you. And if at the end of the day you still don't agree, then we can disagree in an academic, you know, mature way instead of the name calling and
right.
things that we often see. So,
right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because this last time that I was in Canada, I went to like the local bookstore with a copy of my book, wanting to see if they would sell it or I could leave a copy. And the woman there was someone that I knew from this church I was a part of that like split, and she'd gone to the other side, and she was like, "Oh, Steve, I think your book is great, but I can tell you my boss will not stock it. She is like anti-charismatic, and you know, just this title will put her off. You can try if you want, but I'm just gonna like warn you. That's what I think is gonna happen." And so I went and I was looking at the shelves, and there's all these books that were like, you know, would give Jonathan Welton an aneurysm, like the Shemitah and these books about like, you know, and I'm like, she stocks this crap, you know what I mean? But like, you know, is against like this other, like basically segment of the church. And, but incidentally, I saw a book by a woman who had gone to my mom's church and I knew was a self-published author or an author or whatever. So I bought her book and I had no idea what I was in for. Her name is Judy Piers, and the book is called Playing Second Fiddle. And she was talking about, I didn't even finish reading it, not because it was bad, but because I'm just like 20 pages short of finishing it or whatever. But I was reading it, I couldn't put it down when I started, and she was basically sharing how, you know, she got up in some setting to preach, and she felt like, you know, electricity or something going through her while she was in the podium, and it was like, but I'm not allowed to do this, you know, and so she was like, you know, for like years or maybe decades, like wrestling with this, and felt like God called her to go be a part of the church that I grew up in, that I know her from. And her spin on this idea of playing second fiddle is that there's not a first fiddle or a second fiddle, right? Like, you know, in if you form a band or an orchestra, every instrument plays its part, and we've acted like one is more important than the other, and I'm not sure where she's going in the book, you know, because I've not finished it, but like I got the vibe it's a pro like women in ministry type of book, but at the same time it's not, because there's like there's not like a this and a this, like a head and a below, and there's not that. It's like an orchestra with like, there's a guitar, there's drums, there's flutes, there's whatever, and we all play a part. And so the whole men can be pastors and women can't, or you know, whatever, basically disrupts the orchestra that you can have. And that's like a summary of what I'm getting out of the book. And she shares a lot of stories and experiences and stuff. But yeah, that's what you made me think of with everything you were just sharing right there. But like, I know I grew up with people who basically would say things like, well, I'm not going to go to that church or that conference because those guys over there let women be pastors. And it's like, well, how do you know you're not going to get something out of what they have to offer, even though they're just different than you? I'm not going to be able to get anything, because God's very clear in the scriptures that we, you know. And even Destiny Image posted some link to a book on their fan page, and someone left a comment saying like, see, this is a problem I have with you guys, you know, publish female authors or something. And I'm so you begin with this faulty premise that you're not even open-minded to have holes poked in and see if that's really truth. And it's not just men. Like, I've heard women who staunchly believe this. And a number of years ago, this friend of mine, he's like the go-to translator guy. Like, it seems like anybody who's in town on a mission trip or whatever that needs a translator, he's one of the people that they hire. And he was near my house. He called on me one Saturday night or something. So I went and met up with, it was him and another guy and this woman. And from chit-chatting and learning about one another, she was like, I think she was studying for like a PhD or something like that in seminary. And later on in the conversation, something I said about like, in Christ, there's no male nor female, she like just corrected me. And like, I felt like I had no, I'm not smart enough to have an answer for what she launched at me. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, like, she's just hiding behind, I've called her to be a preacher, but she's hiding behind this stuff. And so I just kind of like, found a way later to kind of mention, like, I don't know if this means anything to you, but you're called to preach, I think, but you're using all your theological like stuff as an excuse not to. You're using like the people you're running with, the circles you're in, as like this excuse. Maybe you're afraid of like, what will happen or something. And I have no idea if I was missing the mark or not. She just kind of looked at me like a deer caught in the headlights. But I remember thinking to myself, like, how many people might be called to something, women, but are missing out on these things too because of bad teaching, because of stuff like, I assume your book probably will help lay a foundation to clarify, not just like in charismatic churches, but like I said, I grew up in Plymouth Brethren and I run with some like Baptist and other evangelicals down here from time to time. And I encounter that kind of stuff all the time. So
yeah, that's what I actually love, crossing those unseen boundaries and like being able to cross cultural lines and reach people that are very different than ourselves. Most of the time I see people surround themselves with people just like them. And I have a real curiosity about cultures that are different than my own. And so I like to go and like infiltrate. This sounds so covert, like a spy. But I just like to go and I like to meet people who have I know up front, I already know their beliefs are very different than mine, and not go in like waving a banner of, like I'm about to take this thing down, but just go in and just love people and make friends. And eventually those same friends are like sneaking around asking me questions like about things that would be very controversial in their circles, but I'm not offended by anything. Like, I'm just not offended. I don't know. None of that stuff. Like, I don't get scared to talk about touchy subjects and things like that. So I don't have any problem crossing those lines. And even if somebody says, well, I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard and I don't agree with it still, I'm just like, okay. It doesn't matter because
it's okay. You're wrong.
I'll accept that you're wrong, and I forgive you for being wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I just know that not everybody's open to hearing something in every season of their life, because there was a time when I was really closed off to certain ideas. There was a time when I would have thought that my own book needed to be dealt with. Like, let's burn this thing, because I wouldn't have agreed with it. I would have thought, this is not right, because this is teaching that women have a voice. This is teaching that all sorts of things that I didn't necessarily agree with then, but I was coming out of a lot of legalism. I was coming out of some, in my opinion, really dangerous teachings, and the Lord was being so gentle, leading me out of that bondage. But it's very important for us to be able to like conversate with people who don't agree with us and still not completely like jack them up, like, oh, you don't agree with me? Well, bam, 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 and your mom's ugly, kind of thing. Like, what? You can't do that, because eventually they might be open to what we had to say if we would have just chilled out and just said, okay, you don't agree with me? You think I'm a moron? Okay, it's all right.
Right.
And
I feel like, having grown up in the type of setting I was in, not just for like the egalitarian versus complementarian thing, like women are complementary or whatever, and not just for those reasons, but other doctrines, other, charismatic things, having grown up in an atmosphere that was like not fostering that stuff, and then getting to like go off to like a Bible college that was nothing like that. I think like those kind of experiences not only help me with patience with people who might listen to what I say, because I'm showing them the patience and not just, you know, body slamming them doctrinally or something, right? Like, and that helped inform some of the stuff like I even wrote in the book, and the way I shared some of my testimony and wove that into it. I think like you can be completely right about something and then 100% wrong in how you communicate it and how you like. I'm listening to a lot of these audiobooks lately that are like Seth Godin and entrepreneurial kind of people, and in one of them they were talking about the guy who basically discovered like we need to wash our hands or whatever, like some kind of sanitation thing. Did you hear about this?
Yeah.
Where
this is good. Go ahead.
If I'm remembering right, he was basically, you know, there's a high infant mortality rate of something, and he was basically saying it's because the doctors aren't washing their hands, and there's this E. coli infection or something that these children are getting, and so like, you know, now in 2016 we're like, duh, but apparently this particular doctor was a jerk. And he was a jerk to his peers, and he would treat people like crap. And so it took like decades before like these ideas that he was right about were ever really accepted and implemented because of basically the delivery, you know? And so imagine how many lives were lost. And I feel that there could be like the same type of urgency with certain revelations, like women in ministry and stuff, like the types of things God could put in some women to share, to preach, to write, to do whatever with their gifts. And you could be right about it, and then it's just on the part of the person who's not accepting. But then what happens if like we're basically giving people I don't say we as in like I'm a woman, but I'm going back to like talking about like a revelation or something. But like if we're basically giving people an excuse not to listen to us by our attitude, by our behavior or stuff like that. And, you know, cause like I can think of one setting where I was, years and years ago when I lived in Holland, I was in a conference where one of the keynote speakers was a woman preacher, and she was very like difficult to swallow, like just her attitude and her delivery. And I remember someone asking a question like, you know, where in the Bible is that thing you're talking about? And she just was like, do I have to cite the scriptures? And it was just like, okay. And, you know, I remember a few people come up to me, cause I was kind of like involved in putting that on, you know, like I really had a hard time with that. Do you buy into everything? She said, no, I mean, you know, I get what you're saying. Yeah. That was kind of rude how she was, you know, deflecting any questions people would ask her and stuff. And I'm like, but like the other, there's like good meat on those bones. You know what I mean? It's too bad that like that's how she carried herself, and that's how she preaches and talks to people who ask her questions and stuff. And so it's like I don't know what my question out of that is, or what that is informing that you might want to say to that. But
well,
yeah.
Sorry.
No,
I think it's really important for us to keep our hearts pure, and that's really where that comes from. Is because like because this could cross over and cover a very broad spectrum. People who've been mistreated in the past. Let's say a voice for the Native Americans, a voice for Black Lives Matter. If the voice is angry and ready to decapitate people, then their whole message is not heard. But if we'll get healing of the pain of those memories. So for me, the pain was maybe being asked to leave a pastor's meeting because I wasn't a man. Being told, you know,
and you're saying that has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it has happened. So for me, it was just giving those things to Daddy God and saying like, man, they hurt my feelings, Dad, you know, like, okay, I forgive them. You know, they don't owe me anything. I release that. And like, I had to let that heal. I had to like, it's easy to just be like, oh, this isn't bothering me, and just shove it down. Like, well, I'll show them, I'm just going to study and I'll have a doctorate and blah, blah, blah. Well, but that's the wrong attitude if that's why I'm doing it.
Right.
And if I don't get healing, then I am just going to be another angry woman yelling in a mic saying down with the men, our heart, the contents of our heart and the health of our emotions, it's very important. Whether we think it is or not, it comes across in our writing. It comes across in our speaking, and, the same message can be tainted with bitterness, and it's just lost on people. So
right.
we have, as ministers and leaders, we have a responsibility to keep our hearts pure. I mean, we all know that one leader who've been, they've been mistreated by people for so long. All leaders get mistreated. All people get mistreated by other people.
Sheep
period.
bite.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. But as a leader, we end up in a position where we are more commonly possibly treated badly. But if we don't process it and deal with it, forgive people and move on, then we're just going to we might burn out. We might end up falling into the same sin that we judge in other people's lives too.
And that reminds me of something I heard Rick Joyner teaching about in the old covenant, when like the Levites couldn't serve or minister if they had like unhealed wounds and scabs and stuff. And his take on it was, well, like when you're healing from a wound, like I tripped and fell on pavement last Saturday. I was carrying a lot of stuff and didn't see something that I tripped over, and I just took a tumble on the pavement and got a bloody knee. And for like a few days, it was tender and just sensitive to touch. Now it's just this dry, like, scab healing, right? But he was saying, like, the reason, like, a Levite couldn't be serving with, like, unhealed wounds or with, like, sores and cuts is because, like, then they're sensitive to touch. Like, you can't really you bump into them, or you can't touch maybe wherever the cut is or whatever. And so it's the same thing, like, like our hearts have to not be that way either, or we're not like going to be effective. We're going to be affecting how we interact and stuff. And, like, I've heard, whether it's female preachers or male preachers who have a chip on their shoulder about something that they might not, it's like maybe they walk with a limp, but they're so used to walking with that limp, they don't know they're limping. But like everybody else can see it. And so like what you're saying, I think, I'm just piggybacking on that when we're unhealed of stuff, it does seep into whatever we may be trying to communicate or preach,
Yeah, totally. Well, if you want me to, I can go ahead and shift into, I can tell you a little bit about my testimony.
Sure.
And it's in the book, but I'm from Texas. I was raised in a small town called Paris, Texas, and I had never been out of Texas. I lived my whole life there and never really left the state unless I was visiting family, but only in Louisiana. So still very close. But whenever I was about 16 and 17, I started just started experimenting with things like smoking and alcohol and things like that. And I had been raised in church my entire life. So I just started experimenting with these things and had a lot of shame about it, but I just was really compelled to rebel against my parents. And I went down a really, really rough road. By the time I had graduated high school, I had started smoking weed and doing other drugs as well. When I graduated, I moved to a town about an hour and a half away to go to college. And whenever my safety net was removed, those people around me that, thought I was cool and thought I was, a cute girl, and mommy wasn't there anymore and daddy was far away, I really just started spiraling. Like, it was just, I was extremely depressed. I wasn't sleeping well, and my self-esteem just like plummeted. I didn't know who I was anymore, because these people that had once told me that I was good and worthy weren't there anymore to tell me I was good and worthy anymore. So I went from experimenting around with those I wouldn't say smaller, because it's still a big deal, but maybe possibly less harmful things. And I started going into some deeper addictions. I started doing cocaine and abusing prescription pills like Xanax and some others that were for anxiety and things like that. But I was abusing them, and at one point, I actually overdosed, and that was an all-time low for me. But it really, sadly, wasn't the wake-up call that I really needed. Whenever that happened, my dad, I just went off the grid. I went off the grid for about a week, and I didn't respond to any of my dad's calls or any of that, because I was really ashamed, and I just kind of really wanted to not exist anymore. It wasn't that I was thinking of killing myself. It was just like, I am really, really hopeless. Maybe I could just disappear and I'll just go start a new life. I don't know what I was thinking really, but maybe I'll just go start a new life or something. So, but my dad basically tracked me down. He came looking for me because I wasn't answering my calls. And, when he found me, he was really, really disappointed with all the things that I had done. And he was disappointed at the choices that I had started making when he found out about the stuff that I was doing. But he moved me back to my hometown, and I moved in with my grandmother. And during that time, things really didn't get any better. They just basically spiraled to worse, because I was now surrounded with my old friends again. But I had all this baggage that I was bringing back, and all these new drugs that I had discovered, and all this shame that I was bringing back from all the bad choices that I had made while I was high and all these things. So I was back with my old party friends, but we were partying with much heavier things than we had ever partied with before, back in the days when we were just in high school. I started abusing meth. And that was when things really it was really going out of control. I don't know if I would have lived much longer had not the path been interrupted. But during this time of binging out on meth and just staying strung out for weeks at a time, I found out I was pregnant. And for me, that was devastating. I was devastated at the time. I was just it was the most horrible thing that I could ever have thought of would happen to me. Obviously, that's totally skewed perception.
Well, just for understanding,
yeah.
Being pregnant while in that lifestyle, or just in general at that time of your life, getting pregnant was
at that time in my life.
Yeah, okay.
To me, at that time, it was the worst thing that could happen to me. I didn't understand it at the moment, but it was the best thing. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. So in my immaturity and my disillusionment, I was just I've just got to get things back to normal. I just need to get things back to normal. I'll get back in school, but I can't do all this pregnant. And so I actually started asking questions about abortion, and I started asking different people where I go to get an abortion. And I was, in my mind, I was planning on doing that. I had made up my mind, I'm going to do this. And someone recommended me. They gave me a piece of paper and it had an address on it, and they were like, hey, go to this address and they can help you. And I was like, great, I'm going to go here and get an abortion. This is going to be exactly what I need to get back in my life on the right path. So I made an appointment and I went to that place. And when I got there, there was a lady there that started talking to me about Jesus. And I was so angry. I was just like, this is not what I need to hear right now. So I got up and I was just like, I know who Jesus is. And if you knew him, you would know that he doesn't even like me right now. And I stormed out of the place. I was just the ideal, stereotypical angry teen. And I wasn't even a teenager. I was 20, but still very immature in my thinking. So I stormed out of there, and I wasn't in the room obviously after I left, but I know that she hit her knees and started praying for me. And I know that she contended and cried out to the Lord on my behalf, because I could not scratch up the money for anything. I just couldn't come up with the money to get this abortion that in my mind I needed so badly. I had the enemy telling me that I was the scum of the earth. In my mind, no child deserved to be born to me, and that my baby would be better off in heaven, even if that meant that I did something that my conscience wasn't clear about. It was like I hated myself. I just hated myself, and I didn't want to bring another life into this mess because I wasn't even very good at taking care of myself. So those were the thoughts that was swirling in my mind. The enemy really just like put all these thoughts in my head, and I just accepted them as true. But when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to come up with the money, I decided to just try to make the best of it. So I went back to this place that I had went before, the address that someone had given me, because while I was there, they had told me about parenting classes that they had. So the deal was that if I go and watch these parenting classes, they give me this thing called a mommy dollar. And with mommy dollars, I can buy things in their boutique. In their boutique, there were diapers and clothes for babies and different things that would be very practical for a mom to have. So I go back, watch these parenting videos, and I've watched all of them. I go regularly. Every day I go and I watch these parenting videos. And after I was done watching all the parenting videos, that same little lady told me, well, we have a Bible study here on Tuesdays, and if you come to that, it's $3 mommy dollars. And I was like, what? $3 mommy dollars? She was like, yeah, and there's dinner. I said, okay, I'll be there for that. $3 mommy dollars and dinner? I think I can endure a Bible study for that, and my background, my mindset was very legalistic religion. So I was expecting that. I was expecting that environment when I go to this Bible study. But when I showed up, there's this lady named Michelle. And I got to know Michelle, and it was a Bible study. It was amazing. And Michelle would let us ask questions, and she would go through and explain what scripture means to us and how we could apply it to our lives and things like that. And Michelle talked about God in a way that I'd never heard anybody else talk about him. She explained to us that God loved us no matter what, and that we were accepted and loved by God. Like, he was crazy about us. And she would she would go on and on about how much God loved us. And this was groundbreaking for me. I'd never heard anything like it. And to me, I was very skeptical, because I was just thinking, I don't know if this lady knows God very well, because that's not anything what I've heard about him. I don't know, maybe that's really too good to be true. I don't think that can be the same God that I read about, that I've heard about. It's probably a little more accurate, because my reading was not extensive at that time. And so I went to these Bible studies, and I would go and learn, but during that stretch of time, I never really could fully embrace what she was saying, because I was so skeptical if that could be really God's opinion about me, that he really truly did love me, and that he would just receive me as I was. And so I tried really hard to taint Michelle's opinion of me. I would tell her the horrible things that I did, and I'd be like, and I did this, but Michelle had what I like to call gloves off love. If you were to lose your cell phone and they threw it in a trash can, and you wanted me to go through that trash can with you to find the cell phone, I would insist on wearing gloves because we're digging through trash and it's kind of dirty. But unfortunately, we as Christians sometimes treat people that are non-believers just like that. We need our gloves on in order to deal with them. Ooh, you got some stuff there that's not so pretty, and I don't know that I want to get dirty in your mess. But Michelle was just I just felt like she was willing to dive into my big trash can with me, because my life, I had made a mess. I'd made a huge mess. I'd wronged people that loved me. I had lied to people for drug money. I just the fact that I had been wanting to have an abortion brought shame on me because I knew what it was. I knew the ramification. I knew, and yet I considered myself to be so disgusting because I would even consider it. So it was just like I was just had layers of shame on me. Well, the time passed, and I wasn't sure if I could completely grasp what Michelle was saying, but I decided I really wanted to clean my life up. Okay. So I started going to this Bible study, and I started going to church. When I had my son, I gave birth. 3 days later, I was in the hospital room, and I was turning pages in his baby book, the little baby books where you write all their stuff in, like how fat they were and stuff like that. But I got to the section about the father. Like, there was a mother, you tell about yourself, and then you tell about daddy. And I realized the heavy truth was that there wasn't going to be a happy daddy in the picture. There was no husband waiting for me. There was no dad waiting for mommy and baby to happily take her home. There was nobody going to be in our life like that. And it was just like the reality, the heaviness of the situation just hit me. And so I started to cry. During that time where I started to cry, I didn't have language for it at the time, but I literally felt God step in the room. Now I understand that God is present everywhere, but I felt like God himself had walked in the room, like in full form, like intense presence of God. I just felt like, oh my God, he's here. And I heard him tell me, I love you. And that he just simply spoke, I love you. And I was like, it was just like my breath felt like it was sucked out of me just because I was just so in awe of what he was saying to me. And I was thinking, how could you? And in that moment, God brought me in a memory. It was probably a vision, although I didn't really have a grid for it at the time. It was like a flashback to a memory that I'd had. And in this memory, this was the worst day of my whole life, okay? The worst thing I'd ever done. The worst day, most shameful. I did things that I had truly regretted, like disgusted even myself. And I said to God, why would you show me that? And he said, I loved you then. And it was just like the floodgates of tears had opened up. The ugly cry commenced. The kind where you have like boogers and stuff.
Sure.
And
I don't know. I've never done that.
Okay.
Just kidding.
I was completely undone. I just knew that he loved me at that moment. It was just like, okay, if he loved me then, he could love me now. Because I'm certainly not in as bad of shape now as I was then. And I just wept before the Lord, and I just sat in his presence. When I had calmed down from all this, I flipped the pages and I turned to the back of the baby book where there's an open section for you to write, and I wrote a letter to God. Now, I don't know why I didn't just speak this out into the room. I have no idea, but I'm glad I wrote it because now I remember it, And I wrote a letter to God, and it was like, God, I have made the biggest mess there ever could be, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I give this whole mess to you, and whatever you want to do, just do it. I love you. I want you. I want a part of this kind of message to God. Just like I've never repeated a gospel prayer after anybody, but I've had plenty of emotional experiences at an altar kind of thing. But this was so different because I just knew that he loved me, and I knew that he wanted me, and he wanted me to be his daughter, and that he was willing to accept me the way I was, even in the mess that I was in. And, it impacted my life forever because I learned that the grace of God will meet anybody, everywhere, anywhere. But the grace of God just doesn't leave you there. It doesn't leave you there in the mess. Like he walks us through this beautiful journey where he sets us up right, and we're clothed in his righteousness, and he begins to teach us his ways and teach us his thoughts and show us the depths of his love. And it's amazing. And so I fell radically in love with God that day. And people said, oh, that'll fade. She'll calm down one day. And they were wrong because I've never calmed down about my love for God. And I've just fallen more and more in love with Jesus every day since then. And I have a real passion to see other people who have been rejected by like normal, not normal. I don't want to accept that as normal, but religious Christianity, like that whole like legalistic world that is full of the elite, and the unbeliever isn't welcome, or the very different outcast type of strange personality isn't welcome. So that's my heart.
Or like really handsome people like me are not welcome because I intimidate people who are, not as good look. No,
there you go.
Right. I'm just trying to add some lightness because that's some serious, powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. I mean, I've watched one of your videos, or I think the video on your site that's just a few minutes about your testimony, and so I thought, we're going to talk about our testimony. But some of the details, some of the journey, that's some powerful stuff. I'm curious and I'm interested to learn, connecting the dots from that point to how you're where you're at now, co-pastoring. We kind of talked about authoring. I'd be curious, like a few more steps of that journey to more recently, if you have some time.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I got saved radically in the hospital, I started going to church. I was already going to church, but I started really putting my heart into it. And I was just like, dude, this is amazing. I was like seeing life in Technicolor. But I have been a leader since the moment I got saved because I just wanted to tell everybody about what had happened to me. I just wanted to tell people about this encounter that I had with the Lord. So I began going to church. It's a very legalistic church that I grew up in. It's still pretty close to the same, but but not for long because I'm praying for them. But I began to do children's ministry, and that was the place where I was serving. And I met my husband a year after I got saved, and I met him online. We actually met on a Christian dating website, which is kind of funny.
That happens these days. It's fine.
Yeah, it was so funny the way it happened. But I don't know if I would tell other people, yes, I believe in love at first sight. But I know that I was truly captivated by him very first time.
There's listeners listening who want to know what website. They're like,
I don't recommend that website.
It worked for them. I'm going to,
Oh my goodness. It was such a horrible website because there were people from other countries that were like scouting other people so that they could get like green cards, I'm assuming. I don't really know how this works, but it was like, I was getting messages like, hello, most marvelous eyes woman who makes my heart. And I was like, I don't know if this is for real or not. Like, you know what I mean? So, so we met online. And we had kind of like a whirlwind relationship because I just loved him from the start and he loved me from the start. And we were probably both really naive, but we did hear the Lord too. And so that is what is very, very important because I can admit that I was naive, but I can also admit that I could hear the Holy Spirit talking to me. And so could he, even as, probably pretty immature people. We knew the voice of the Lord from very early on. And so we wanted to get married, and we actually knew each other 6 months when we got married. I don't recommend for everybody to do that, but if you hear the voice of the Lord and you want to act on that, I say it's between you and the Holy Spirit. But we loved each other, and so we got married. We became youth pastors just like maybe 2 months after we were married. I had been leading in the church that I was a part of, but this was a little bit more responsibility than I had been used to. But we stepped into that, and we were youth pastors for about a total of a little over 5 years. Now, that in and of itself was its own little journey. The average youth pastor only lasts like 8 months.
Well, have you ever heard the joke, how many youth pastors does it take to change a light bulb? None. They're never around long enough for the light to go out.
Exactly. Yes, we did hear that one a lot. So the average life not life expectancy, we won't go there. We won't even go to that part. But we were at our first location for a year and a half, which is like, an old timer in youth pastor years. But so we did move around. They weren't able to keep us on as the youth pastors any longer because of some budget constraints. And so we moved on. And we had our little ups and downs and journey that really molded us, and God used to really teach us and grow us as leaders and really grow us in our identity as children of God. And the Lord took me from striving and performance-based leadership, where I was performing, and so I expected other people to perform. So I was not the most happiest youth pastor. It was like, your shirts are too short and you're not supposed to be wearing that shirt, kind of thing. Like, yeah, we do need guidance, somewhat like that, but it probably needs to be a lot more gentle and in the context of a relationship, which I wasn't getting at the time because I was performing. I felt that I was having to perform for God's approval, whereas he was trying to get me to abide. He was trying to get me to just be a daughter and just be. But I went on a journey there. Joyce Meyer's books really helped me a lot in this area because it was like she was a lot like me, and she had struggled with the same things that I had struggled with, was like anger and like controlling behavior and things like that. So that was really helpful to me. Her books were amazing. And, but I started to become free from these things, and I started to experience, freedom from worry and freedom from depression and things like that. If we fast forward the story a little bit down the road, we ended up in Oklahoma as youth pastors. And this was like the ideal youth pastor scenario because we had like the coolest, it wasn't just a youth room. Like, it wasn't like they put us in a closet somewhere. Like typically what we see with sometimes happens with the youth of the church. It's like, here, we're not using this classroom anymore. You guys paint the walls black and do something fun, right. Whatever. And it wasn't like that at all. We had this huge youth facility, and it was nicer than the adult sanctuary. There was a stage, we had PlayStations, there was an indoor basketball cage, there was a cafe. It was amazing. It was like the perfect youth facility. And we were there for about, I think, 10 months. I'm probably getting some numbers wrong. My husband's probably in the other room thinking, no, it was 7.5 or something. I don't know. But
he's texting you right now going.
Yeah, he's going to text me. My phone is off.
So. Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
But my husband came to me one day and he was like, Amber, I believe God's calling us to plant a church. And I was like, oh my Lord, this man's gone crazy. Like, I was just like, sorry. I don't really want to talk about this. I'm happy. Why do you always want to change things? That's what I was thinking. I was just like, I don't want to talk about this. Please just forget you ever thought that. And let's just enjoy life, please. And he was like, well, just pray about it. Okay. Pray about it and we'll talk about this. We'll just put a pin in it and we'll talk about it again later. And I was just like, I'm not going to pray about anything about this. Like, I just had a horrible attitude. I was just like, I don't want to pray about this because honestly, I didn't want to know the truth because I did not want it to change. I didn't want to move again. I didn't want to disrupt our lives. I wanted to put roots down right there. That's what I wanted. And so it was bothering me. I wouldn't even at the time admit that it was God trying to speak to me. I was just like, this idea is bugging me, but it was the Lord. Looking back, I know it was the Lord, but I was in denial at the time because I really didn't want to do it. I did not want to move and I did not want to plant a church. I was just like, no way. I do not want that kind of responsibility. And, the idea bothered me. And so one day I was so frustrated I was frustrated actually with the Lord, but I was also, because I felt like he was kind of nagging me a little bit, like, because the idea was just rolling back up over and over. And I'm like, oh, okay, God, I'm going to need like a sign. I'll just be Gideon for a moment. I need a sign. And I was really at a broken place because I was just like, I think I might be disobedient right now, you know, like, and that broke my heart because I had always said, Lord, you say where and I'll go. I don't care if it's China. I've never been called for a mission work, but I was just like, I don't care where it is. I'll go there. I don't care if it's dangerous. I'll do it, whatever it is. But there God was calling me to somewhere pretty safe because Renee is my husband's name. Renee was telling me, he was really specific. He was like, I think God's calling us to Virginia to plant a church, you know, like, and I was just like, well, you know.
Virginia, like a city in northern Siberia?
No, Virginia, like, sorry.
Yeah, I know. I'm just messing with
United States, on the East Coast. So I told the Lord, all right, well, I need a sign. And I don't recommend anybody to pray exactly what I prayed. And I wouldn't do the same way if I had it to do over, because I told the Lord, God, if this is what you want, then I want to want it too. I need to not love this so much. I want to be able to embrace that. And God knew exactly what that meant, but I did not know what that meant at the time. But it was like everything started flying out of control. It was just like there were people who, even now, I know that these are people of God, but we're just acting like crazy, you know, like everything was going wrong. The pastor's wife, she co-pastored. So she showed up in our services with like a clipboard taking notes. And that is never a good thing when people are taking notes on clipboards. So I was just like,
especially if they're stopping you at the mall and they've got one. No, anyway.
Yeah, that's even worse. Well, so in the back of the sanctuary taking notes during our service with a clipboard, and I'm like, this isn't good. And so there were other little situations and flare-ups where I was just like, there has been a shift. There has been a shift take place, and I don't think we're supposed to be here anymore. Like, that's what I was thinking. So I went before the Lord. I was crying because I'm letting go of this thing that I loved that's not the same anymore, because the only reason it wasn't the same anymore is because I wouldn't let go of it. And the Lord was trying to show me in a nice way, and then I needed this crazy sign in order to be able to let go. So I came home, my eyes were swollen from crying and puffy, and I told Renee, I was like, we gotta quit. We gotta move. We gotta do what God asked us to do. You know, I was just like, I want to obey the Lord. I don't care about giving 2-week notices anymore. I just want to obey. I want to obey. And so, of course, my husband, he'd been thinking about it a little longer, so he was probably a little more level-headed than me. So he was just like, okay, we're going to actually quit the right way. You know, he was a little more rational, and I was just like, what the Lord says goes over man's tradition. I was like, you know, ready to just take our backpack on our backs and march to Virginia, you know, and he was a little more well thought out. He was thinking more like a U-Haul, you know, so practical. I'm happy for that. Praise the Lord. So we did. We put in our notice, and we were just like, we've got to do this. And so we moved to Virginia. We actually moved in my mother-in-law's basement, and we lived there for almost a year. Good times.
That was convincing.
Well, I think that it was very challenging at times, but there was a grace for it when it was what we were supposed to be doing. So, but it was very trying. It was challenging too, and it grew. It matured both of us, I'm sure. But I can definitely speak for myself and say that it matured me to live. It was humbling. I can say that for a fact. It was very humbling. But we started looking for a house, and we started looking for jobs. And what we found was that there was a town nearby called Winchester, which is where we live now. And it seemed to be like a small town feel, but some amenities of living in a larger town, like a mall and a Chipotle and a Starbucks, that I'm very fond of. Just to thank the Lord for those comfortable amenities right now. But anyways, we moved to Winchester. We prayed about it. And so we're about 3 years into our church planting journey. And it's very, very rewarding. I had like these ideas in my head about what it was going to be and what it was not going to be. But I found that the journey to doing this and enjoying it has been putting out of our head like preconceived notions about, well, this is what women who are pastoring with their husbands do. This is how they are. They're in the children's ministry, or we have these like possible stereotypes that we think. And one of the most liberating things for us in church planting has been to push all those out of our head and say, okay, how did God make me? What are the gifts he gave me? What are the gifts he gave you? Like, well, I know that this church teaches a church planting 101, but how is God calling us to do this? What is the Holy Spirit saying? I know how it's been done before, but what are we going to do, kind of thing? So that's where we're at now. And my husband and I both lead as co-pastors in our church. We have different, I wouldn't call them jobs. And I don't even know if I would say the word roles, but we're both over different departments. We both lead differently, very differently. And quite frankly, we're at a place where we've found a very smooth rhythm, and we really enjoy it. Now that I've said that, we'll have to change our rhythm. No, I'm just kidding.
God's going to call you to something else now, just like the youth pastoring thing,
Well, when he does,
right,
we'll have a heart that is open to it, because there is such bliss in obedience. It's like sometimes we have this like spoonful of something, and we're like, this spoonful of something that I've been given, it's amazing, it's awesome, it's mine, and I love it, and I want it. And God will call us to lay it down. And he's not mean, he's not bad at all. He calls us to lay it down, and we're like, no, this is mine. And we'll even convince ourselves that, oh, well, I didn't hear God, I'm going to push it completely out, even though we knew he called us to do it. But what happens is that when we take this little spoonful of something and we lay it down, what God does is he has the shovel, and he's like, right. And he hits us with 20 times of whatever it was that we laid down. It was like he just wanted us to surrender it.
Right.
He just wanted us to lay it down, and he wanted to give us something even better back.
Right. That's like with my daughter, right? She's 2, and maybe it's time to take her like somewhere that we know she's really going to like. And we're like, okay, let's go, Jimmy, let's go. And she won't like let go of like some little toy she's got in her hand. We're like, no, we're going to go somewhere better. No. It's like she has no sphere that there's like something cooler we're about to like give her. She just got to leave that toy here or give it to mommy to put in her purse or whatever. And I think sometimes we're like these 2-year-olds. They're like, no, when the adult knows better and has something much more interesting to give us,
Absolutely.
So,
definitely see that.
Well, normally I talk a lot more on these conversations, but I have been enjoying your storytelling and just your cadence in general with how you share things. So I don't have much more to share. We're getting close to the time my wife and daughter will get back in the house. So I think we've covered like everything I wanted to make sure we got talking about. But is there anything that you're like, oh, you didn't ask me about this yet? Or you know what? Now that we're sitting here talking, I really would love to throw this out there before we wind up. Is there anything burning on you like that?
I can't think of anything that we missed or that I wanted to add that we didn't.
Okay. You'll probably think of something afterward.
Yeah, it'll be afterwards.
That always happens to me where I'm editing. I'm like, why didn't I ask this person this and that? But like
I'll
I said,
just blog it. If
sure.
So.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have no idea how long it'll take before this goes online. It could be weeks. But yeah, I really enjoyed today. I know it's a number of months before your book is out, but your website, what's your link? I like to give my guests, whatever it is they write or they're selling or they're doing to promote it.
Yeah, it's amberpicota.com. And I'm having some problems with my website right now, so I don't know if you'll run into any problems with it. I'm in the process of switching over. I think I might have mentioned a little bit of this to you in email, but it's amberpicota.com, though. And I'm so overly frustrated with my website right now. I can't even begin to describe you. But my husband he's a web designer and stuff, but he's got his plate full. And so, but I cried. And so now he's going to help me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. He was going to help me anyways, but I did cry. But I was just overwhelmed because I was just like, it's not working right. And so he's going to be helping me over the next couple of weeks transition from a Wix to WordPress site because right now my page doesn't even load for some people. I don't know if it's loading for you. I can only pray that
it's up. Okay. It's showing for me.
Awesome. But I am more familiar with WordPress because I manage Doug Addison's blog as well. And so he does WordPress. And I am having a hard time with going back and forth. And I don't know how to do, like, I don't want to learn two platforms. Just like I wouldn't want to have an Android and an Apple at the same time, or Microsoft, whatever it's called. I wouldn't want to have to learn both operating systems.
You don't want Apple and crap at the same time. No,
exactly.
I'm probably offending like the 80% of people listening who use something Apple, or Windows related. But anyway.
Well, I'm an Apple girl, but I wouldn't want to try to learn both of them at the same time. So amberpicota.com is my website. That's going to stay the URL, but expect to see some changes for the better, cleaning things up, and overall just making it a better user experience. Right.
And I'm on the link right now. And so you've got a link to your church, the Welton Academy. And this has, I don't know, maybe you've got something to say about this. What is Spirit Fuel? I just went and signed up. I just went and looked at it, liked it.
My husband is one of the authors for Spirit Fuel. I have been for a long time, but I haven't added my blogs over there for a while because it's not worth my time at the moment. It's not that it's not a good platform. It's just that I haven't had the time to do it. But Spirit Fuel is sort of like a modern day Elijah List, if you think of it that way. I like it. I like the bloggers, the platform that they give to bloggers. And basically any author, anybody can submit an article to them and be approved to be a Spirit Fuel author if you're accepted. And so a lot of my friends, I've passed on the word to them that they want writing more experience. They want more a bigger platform to be able to speak that what God has placed on their heart. And so I have quite a few friends that are authors for Spirit Fuel. So you can look at them up on Facebook, and they send out those blogs. And my husband is one of the authors there, and so is Doug Addison is a syndicated author. Hopefully I just said the right word.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. It's very interesting. Worth looking into.
I'm glad I asked you that because I'm also a moderator for a Facebook group for like writers for it's called The Time Is Right, and it's basically for kingdom-minded authors. And this I don't know what might come of this. Maybe some people might be interested in that. I'm going to definitely look at it more. Good. It caught my attention, and I don't normally ask people about the links on their sidebar on their blog, but yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to end the recording anyway. And thank you very much, Amber, for being willing to be on this today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me on. It was an honor.
Okay, thanks. And goodbye, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, you can find us in iTunes or on Stitcher Radio, or directly at fireonyourhead.com for more options. If you want to support Steve and Lily Bremner as missionaries in Peru, or find out more about what they do, be sure to head over to their blog at stevebremner.com, or check out Steve's Kindle books on Amazon and leave reviews of the ones you liked. See you next time.